have some proper videos being scripted now, but the physical personification of ragweed came into my house and kicked my ass, so easy videos to fill the void it is. How much does the grass need to be pollinating, y'all? Also, spoiler alert ahead, because BioWare's got a really weird idea of what constitutes editing to avoid major spoilers, unless they think isn't actually a major spoiler, which implies grave and terrifying things about the things they do consider spoilers. Anyways, EA released the Veilguard high-level combat video today, as of me writing the script, with a focus on warrior melee combat. This makes sense. Human warrior man is the most commonly played archetype basically in every fantasy RPG thing ever, though BioWare's mixing it up with an elven warrior lady here, so it actually provides a lot of useful information to a lot of people. The first thing we see right after big spoiler text is the character loadout screen, so let's take a look at what we see here before the trailer tries to tell us anything as a means of gauging how informative the UI is at just a glance. First off, out of the way now, look at that hair. Truly the age of classic plastic BioWare bobs has ended. Andraste blessed. Okay, moving on. We can see here as well the full extent of Rook's equipment slots, with 2 weapon sets, a helmet, an armor piece, and 4 accessories. 2 rings, an amulet, and thingamabob. I didn't say we were going to extrapolate all the data. What I can say is that these pieces of equipment show, through their colored borders, that gear is most likely going to follow the same tier structure that Inquisition did. Common gear, likely the green stuff, blue rare gear for higher levels, and purple unique gear. You can also see visibility markers up there, which implies that finally, we will be able to choose who wears a hat on a case-by-case basis. No longer will I have to choose between taking away Cole and Vivian's iconic headgear and having to wear a truly stupid helmet. Andraste fucking bless. It also looks like Rook will have both sets of their class's equipment easily available to them regardless of loadout, since the second loadout down here lacks the shield slot. While I'm personally more of the kind to build to a specific weapon only, my Inquisitor would not be holding that hammer, I am also of the belief that more build options to the player is better, and being able to build to a jack-of-all-trades is something that a lot of people like doing. My only hope is that this leads to an increase in build options, and not a state where, say, every rogue rook ends up feeling like the same build because, say, every rogue rook has to have a bow and dual weapons, even if the player actively doesn't want one of those. I better have the option to keep that second equipment slot empty. Moving on from that, we see over here on the left some basic info. This rook's name, class, and background, confirming that the surname option for a Grey Warden rook will be Thorn, and the damage output of her weapon and the defense of her shield. Inquisition made a distinction between defense levels from the front and back of a character, with shields providing extra defense to the front but not the back, and it's possible that will be the case here. I hope so, it was a fun mechanic in Inquisition. EA gets to take the wheel for a couple seconds to introduce to us the abilities and runes, but I'm taking it right back as soon as we see an abilities info. The introduction of attack type here interests me. While the idea of different damage types linked to elemental magic isn't new, the idea of attacks having different types beyond their damage was always more implied than outright stated, and suggests an extra layer to the combo system even before we see it in action. This is backed up by the blurb text that indicates what other interactions and buffs, debuffs are applied. We also see that warriors are starting to get way more access to different elemental types as well, as the second and third ability deal fire and necrotic damage respectively. I saw that last ability and was like, oh shit, is that a background specific ability? But no, we see later in the skill tree that's a champion skill. The champion specialization has just been reflavored to be very specific to the Grey Wardens. Not saying background specific abilities can't be a possibility, but man, I was so hyped at the idea of background specific moves. Do you know how much replayability that would add? There's also runes, which are actually a lot like League of Legends runes, really. as they provide a unique set of passive and active traits that further customize a build to a specific role. For example, this rune here provides an ability that freezes enemies in melee, as well as adds a bonus to freeze duration. So, while its obvious purpose here in this video is for the warrior to draw aggro and crowd control a pile of baddies, it could also be used to pump the power of, say, a certain ice mage's pre-existing freezing abilities, which I assume she has. Oi, dumbass McGee! Companions don't have runes! This is honestly the most exciting part of the build for me. Back when I briefly glanced at League, I really enjoyed what the rune pages brought to the table. And one of my favorite parts of the Elden Ring Reforged mod is the fortune system that lets you further fine-tune how your build works to fit your playstyle. This sort of granular building scratches that itch in the back of my head real good. There's also like 3 separate currencies up top there. Thanks, I hate it. Music slaps though. After that, we get to see that sexy bitch, the skill tree. That is some sphere grid ass building right there, let me tell you. The core ring of the tree is split into 6 separate groups. 3 groups that lead into respective specializations, and 3 groups that have their own thing going on. We also get to see some close-up stuff of the skills, but there's not actually that much that's new compared to how Dragon Age skills have always been. You got your active abilities, your passive traits, your specializations. At the end of the day, it do truly be a Dragon Age progression system, even if a bit gussied up. The best way I can explain it is to waggle my hands at Inquisition and say, go play that. After that, they focus on the inventory for reals, and yep, there it is, rare and blue, right there. Can you tell I'm writing the script practically shot by shot? This actually also subtly showcases the transmogrification system in action, though. We can see from this item description that this is Navaran armor with vividly sculptured musculature, which is not what it looks like when it's actually on the character, implying that there's a transmog active. The armor doesn't say it's specifically been transmogrified, so either that's just not part of the UI, or the transmog system is more akin to a wardrobe system visually pasted over your character than an actual change to the armor itself. I've seen applications of both in my day. What I've noticed throughout the entirety of this equipment is the presence of necrotic damage being mentioned a lot. This is new. The elemental damages have always been fire, lightning, ice, nature, and spirit. Nature damage, which is basically just poison, got dropped in Inquisition, but necrotic might be what fills its shoes. Given that the video lauds this as an anti-darkspawn build, the emphasis on resisting necrotic damage in a loadout suggests that a lot of darkspawn-specific damage is necrotic. Given the flavor text of both armor and shield, undead enemies also probably deal necrotic damage. That's probably obvious, but it's worth keeping in mind. Prayer circle for there to be spirit damage equivalent, so my spirit wrangling Mournwatch rogue can feel like someone who deals with honorary spirits on the regs. Min-maxing is for suckers, we flavor max in this household. It also suggests enemy weaknesses. Namely, since this anti-darkspawn build focuses on fire damage, and the explicit Grey Warden ability deals fire damage, it's extremely likely that darkspawn are weak to fire. They hover over every accessory slot except the one I can't identify. Biora, you teases! After that, we get a look at how NPC loadouts look like through Davrin's setup. Companion slots seem to be more limited, which some people might not like. As someone who suffered through trying to juggle 10 sets of Inquisition and jewelry though, I'm personally honestly fine with their setups being more simple. Let me focus on my babe. I also noticed that Davrin's sword has a +1 to it, making me wonder if companion weaponry is locked to specific items you upgrade. It would make sense. I don't know how many fancy magic bows there are in the world for Bellara to equip. We also see here what the party's skill trees look like. Party members have custom loadouts based on their backstories and specialties, which is a big step away from how they've been for the past 3 games. The closest we got is Dragon Age 2 with custom specializations. And with some exception, I'm pretty sure those were just reskinned versions of existing specializations. You can't fool me, Anders, that's just a spirit healer tree and silly glasses. I mentioned this very briefly in my last video, but I'm actually really glad for this change. I had a Sword and Board Inquisitor, and between me, Cass, and Blackwall, trying to figure out how to make each Sword and Board tank play differently from each other was exhausting. Here, the characters each have their uniqueness built in, which turns around and helps your character feel more like a unique aspect of the party comp instead of tank number 3. I love how the video tooltip says you should bring Davrin, but the actual character select screen is very clear that you do not have a choice in the matter. Thanks. We do catch glimpses of Emmerich and Harding as the invisible hand of the marketing department slides over to Lucanus. Emmerich's described as being someone who specifically summons spirits, which, alongside Davrin's ability to call in adorable bombardment from Hassan, could be a fun minion master combo party. Harding is described as potion slinging with elemental arrows, so her build is likely going to resemble Sarah from Inquisition in application. Postscript text here. Actually, the BioWare Twitter released info on the companion's abilities after writing this part of the script. Emmerich's more of a CZ support caster, while Harding seems to be primarily DPS with debuffs against the enemy. What do you mean, demonic aura? What is this man's deal? Before we get into the actual combat, I need to point out the modeling and animation on this dragon. If you watch, you can see that the skin on the bottom of its neck moves and shifts similarly to how real reptilian skin moves. The detailing on this critter overall is absolutely fantastic, looking still recognizably draconic, while bringing a very monstrous bent with its mouth that opens all the way back to its horn, its jagged and bony lower jaw, and its nose horn thing. I might have my problems with the Darkspawn design, but the art and design team on Veilguard has absolutely knocked it out of the park with the dragons. Speaking of the Darkspawn, we get into the combat scene proper, and oh, look at that, Darkspawn are weak to fire and resistant to necrosis. Once again, my skills of basic data extrapolation are here to dazzle and surprise. I joke, but that's the point in the game's favor. The most important part about whether an RPG system will work is whether or not it's intuitive, that someone can do what I did and tease out details about the combat from limited information even before it just straight up gets told to us. Like, I love Elden Ring, I would die for it. Death's Poker is probably my favorite weapon in all of video game weapons, but I'm not gonna sit here and pretend the game doesn't hide a lot behind its back in terms of how stuff works and what scaling is best for what. Veilguard doesn't seem to be doing that in terms of its UI and combat mechanics, and that's nice. Although if I do have a criticism, it's that the way that this menu is laid out, with the text box fading into the circle while being the exact same height, makes the creature examination look like it's connected to the person on the right, and I spent an embarrassing amount of seconds going, why do ghouls have mustaches in this game? Before realizing that it was just a really unflattering angle of Lucanus. If I have another criticism, it's that is a really unflattering view of Lucanus. Speaking of Elden Ring, we have guard counters now. Like, that's just guard counters. I mean, I'm not complaining. Like I said, I love Elden Ring. This is very much a chew cake scenario. I just think it's funny that I can pretty readily guesstimate just how the senior devs at BioWare spent the last weekend of February 2022. As if I needed the confirmation after the Nvidia teaser showed that we have Glintstone Arc at home mass spell. Yeah, I see you. You can't shift the hue circle 10 degrees towards green and act like we're not gonna notice. A good chunk of what comes next is pretty self-explanatory and familiar to anyone familiar with BioWare's catalog. The armor versus barrier stuff and health 3 stocks in the overworld are both known factors of combat in both Inquisition and the Mass Effect games. And I don't really think I have to go into detail about shield throw. You understand shield throw. Haha, we will touch on the stagger bar, which is just another Leo pointing meme to any Elden Ring player because that is just dance breaking. For those unaware, every enemy in Elden Ring has both poise, which allows them to endure hits without their attacks being interrupted, and stance, which, when broken, allows the player to deal a critical hit for massive damage. This is why Big Sponk's strength builds are so gosh darn powerful in Elden Ring. Those heavy strength weapons deal lots of stance damage, breaking stance more easily, and creating both more windows for attack, and fewer windows where the enemy is attacking you. This information is generally invisible to the player, but usually the stance bar is around 80 points or so, and regenerates after a few seconds. This stagger bar is someone at BioWare going, but what if we could see the stance damage? If someone doesn't find a way to translate their big bonk stunlock build from Elden Ring to Veilguard, I will be deeply disappointed in us as a society. It goes into more detail about the game's buff and debuff system, and general crowd control strategy, which is another one of those, if you're watching my video, you know what a debuff is. It's fair that BioWare wants to explain the very basics of things, like how ranged abilities work for those folks who are super new to action RPGs, but it doesn't leave me much to talk about. All I can say is that the more I see the game's combat in action, the more I want to get my hands on its build system. Everyone wants the character creator to drop early. Me, I want to look at those sphere grids. After all this information, we're shown details of the game's combo system. Combos have actually been in the series from the word go. Just say the word Storm of the Century to a mage main and watch their eyes light up. But that's always been a side feature, a happy accident most of the time. Never in Dragon Age specifically has cross-character combos been so heavily the focal point, and I think that focus is what a lot of the party combat is going to live and die on. The combo they show in-game is a pretty simple staple. Draw enemies into a big area, hit them with a big AoE crowd control so they can't scatter, then absolutely obliterate them with big AoE burst damage. Lucanus has an ability called Abominate? BioWare, I am in your goddamn walls, what does that mean? While the overall concept seems nice, I do hope there's an option to tone the fuck down all the flashy effects and everything in an accessibility menu somewhere. I can easily see this causing a migraine for some folks, and while my migraines aren't visually triggered like that, I'm still having a few issues with visual clarity out here. That could impact both the fun of gameplay and the ability to take full advantage of the new maneuverability added into the combat. The ultimates are an adaptation of the focus abilities from Inquisition, including being specialization specific as confirmed by EA in the connected text blog. The one we see isn't that complex beyond Big Fire AoE, which I will note is a strange ultimate for the tank subclass. Inquisition's champion subclass filled up the guard meter and taunted all nearby enemies, basically turning yourself into a hit-me turtle that never dies. And that makes sense, because the tank fantasy is about drawing and enduring aggro and laughing in the face of those who would try to hurt you, not fire damage? On the flip side, looking at what little of the champion tree we can see earlier in the video, there are several shield icons in the passives, as well as what looks like a heart icon that might symbolize a health or overall survivability buff, and a lot of what made champions so fucking unkillable in Inquisition came from their passives anyway. If you know anything about how guard was calculated in that game, you know exactly how insane an extra 25% of guard boost is if you're running a high con build. I speak from experience here. So, Champion, being the immortal super tank it was in Inquisition, is still on the table, even if not through its attack abilities. While that's the last of the information we get from the added text, let's try and look at the combat afterwards to try and glean some insider information. For example, while the video never explicitly points the glowing red barrels out in text, we see Rook use a shield throw to detonate them at one point, confirming that the game will have its fair share of environmental hazards to be used to aid, or perhaps hinder, the party. At the very least, I would suggest using the barrels better than this. Come on now, there wasn't an enemy anywhere near that AoE. We also see whoever's playing is able to pull up the abilities menu as a sort of quick bar on the bottom, which is nice as it allows for faster, more reactive play for those who prefer that over the pause and play style, while keeping the pause and play options intact. It's a nice balance that takes both sets of players in mind. This system seems set up for the PS5 in mind, and the hotbar UIs have naturally been different system to system, so as a PC gamer, I'm interested in seeing how that plays out for us. So, that's the last of it, right? That's all 10 minutes of combat footage to pick through for info? Nope. The video wasn't just a video, but also came attached to an article on the EA site that had additional details and context. Yay! My throat hurts so bad. The EA article, among other things, goes into detail a bit about the specialization options. We knew a lot of this already, but there are a few things that make me curious, and a few things that make me worried. Actually, it's just one thing that makes me worried. In previous games, specializations were not explicitly tied to weapon types. While the Party Tempest Inquisition was an archer, and the Party Reaver was a two-handed warrior, you could totally build outside of that range. There is, after all, no Reaver skill specifically tied to a giant two-handed axe. With every specialization being represented by a party member, this was one of the ways you could make your Inquisitor stand out build-wise. I mean, it wasn't the path I took with Samiris. I made him a sword and board champion because I am very boring, but the option was there. Anyway, the EA article in a couple places emphasizes an idea that different specializations are going to be tied to specific weapon types, which kinda goes against the idea of granular building. Like, what if I don't want my Saboteur to pick them off with arrows, BioWare? What if I want to use traps to CC enemies before blitzing in with daggers and blendering them? What if I don't want a lightning-themed Spellblade? What if I want to do fire magic? Which of these options is the fire magic option, BioWare? Also, why do these specialization descriptions sound like I'm reading hype blurbs for new Warframes? I am probably reading too much into 5 words, so feel free to call me a fretful, nitpicky weirdo in the comments section. Postscript Hex here. Turns out while I was sick recovering from my latest COVID shot on top of all the allergy bullshit, there was another Discord Q&A. I'll be linking the summary from Reddit down below. All mages have access to all elemental magic. Certain specializations just have elements easier than others. Also, you can build a warrior that's not as visually flashy as the one in the video if you want to, so Elden Ring Claymore bros rejoice. More on the Q&A later. My hope is that the limited amount of ability slots means that we can just kind of ignore the weapon or element-specific specialization abilities and integrate them into a pre-existing loadout. And by hope I mean that better be how it works. I don't like playing archers in Dragon Age games.
Isn't your canon talk an archer?
You will note that I haven't touched Dragon Age 2 since getting B-roll from it. I just also think that more mix and match equals more replayability and ties more into that granular character building thing I mentioned earlier. So even beyond my get that bow away from me bias, I do think it would be healthier for the game if mix and matching weapon types and specializations was still an available option. There's also the fact that the Gish option for mages is, by Trick Week's own words on Blue Sky, going to be more Nightblade than Battle Mage, which has a few people reasonably saddened since the Tank Mage subclass was easily by far one of the most popular ones across the series. They did mention afterwards that there are builds available for tanky mages, but I can still see how people are mourning their favorite subclass. I can see that because I am also doing that. Assassin, my beloved. Past all the subclass details, we also get a couple more details regarding the basics of attacks, including the fact that you can charge your light and heavies, oh my god. This is the impact Elden Ring is going to have on the RPG sphere for the next 10 years, people. Souls-like mechanics have broken containment. I hope you like hearing the words charged heavies for the next 10 years.
You know there are other games besides Elden Ring, right? Could one of the 80 million action RPGs out there not also have charged heavies and guard counters?
You are correct. Counterpoint. I feel pretty comfortable using my knowledge of Elden Ring as a good baseline to come at when understanding what BioWare is going for, though I will acknowledge my equal lack of understanding when it comes to a lot of the AAA action RPGs. I have not played God of War or Horizon or any other of Sony's exclusive babies, so there is a good chance I misidentify the inspiration for a particular combat concept. I also don't genuinely believe that the dev team were deliberately like, let's rip off Elden Ring. I am known to say things for the bit sometimes, but there are some clear aspects that draw from the same well, and it's not like the 2022 Game of the Year wasn't going to influence the gaming landscape a bit. It's not worth using as a baseline. There are a few details that aren't just, we have FromSoft combat systems at home, though. Namely, they mention that while heavy attacks clear armor faster, ranged attacks clear arcane shields faster. I can't find anything that suggests that this was the case with barriers in Inquisition. While there was a stat that defined the damage you did to barriers, a lot of it was tied to the equipment you wore. Certain cloth fabrics and weapons could boost the bonus damage done to enemy barriers. It is true that the loot weapons that provided this bonus were more often staves and bows, i.e. ranged weaponry, but it's also more true that magic staves outpaced physical weaponry of all relevant weapons by an entire mile, suggesting that clearing barriers was less a ranged attack thing and more a magic damage thing. Another detail of interest to me is down the ways a bit and refers to the change in stamina. In the past, mages have mana and warriors and rogues had stamina. Now, stamina's been split into two separate resources, momentum for rogues and rage for warriors. Warriors keep their rage upkeep by taking and dishing out hits respectively. Rogues by dodging and parrying attacks, and mages by just existing. There are two things about this feature I find very cool. First is that rogues and fighters have multiple options for building up their resource. So if you're like me and you're a dodge-rolling loon first and a parry master never, you still have ways of keeping up combat momentum. Second is just that it helps keep the melee classes distinct from each other. Leave it to BioWare to drop even more info while I'm finishing up this script. Thanks.
Honey, you've got a big storm coming.
So, as mentioned before, there was a Q&A on the official BioWare Discord, and combat was one of the things that came up. Again, the link to the Reddit summation is in the description, but the part that's relevant to me is this part, about how gameplay has left the need for a core warrior mage rogue trio behind, and how each combat can be built with a variety of gameplay styles in mind. Now, I have seen the occasional concerned rumbling about this, and I do agree it is a departure from the series' usual party RPG style of play, but I do think it is a necessary departure given the shift from controlling every party member to controlling just Rook. In other Dragon Age games, you are basically bringing 4 combat styles into battle to switch into as you please, but in Veilguard you're only bringing 1. So they want to make damn sure that you can build that one in a way that you enjoy without getting your shit kicked in, unless you're into that, or having to rely overly much on the support of companion AI. In addition, using the tank aspect specifically to focus on, there have always been different ways to tank that don't require a warrior, even within the Dragon Age series. Historically, the best tanks have been the mages, actually, with Meryl and Vivian both having specializations that build very well into not dying. And let's not talk about Arcane Warrior. The parry and dodge mechanics available to rogues means you can easily build them into a dodge-type tank. Reaper Warriors might not be sword and board, but I can confirm from experience that lifesteal and regen tanks are always a blast. The concepts of aggro management and damage mitigation are still there, they're just adapted to what's effectively a solo plus combat experience, instead of a party RPG experience. I know other people might mind that change, and that's fair, but I don't mind it too much. I do still kind of share that fear that the devs' FOMO concerns will lead to a case where builds and playthroughs end up feeling a bit homogenous. Though my hopes do lead more into the direction of build diversity over build homogeny, since the latter is so specifically what the dev team is trying to encourage and emphasize. And whatever it is, at least it won't be as bad as Starfield locking half its basic gameplay functions behind skill points and forcing players to burn half their build on unlocking the goddamn game. It's always nice to know where the bar is. Now, at this point, the script for this video is much longer than the hype video, and I still haven't gotten to the point of the title. Hex, people are wondering, when are you going to get to the point? And that's a fair question. What does Veilguard need to stake the landing? Beyond all the finicky build details, there's two things Elden Ring does that really helps its combat come together. And I think Veilguard's going to have to really lean into both if it wants to rip off FromSoft properly. The first is in the way combat looks and feels. FromSoft's animation and sound design teams are probably the biggest reason why combat in their games feels as good as it does. A big heavy sword, yes that's a sword, feels weighty even when all you do is press a button, and in contrast a dagger feels quick and light. If your sword bounces off a wall or a stone enemy, you feel it, and the slam of the hammer is felt too. This also carries over to boss animations, which is why bosses like Crucible Knight feel so good to fight against once you have their attack timings memorized. Luckily, while the game will have to be in our hands for a real judgment to be made, what we see of the combat animation really looks like it feels good. I'd mentioned that I'd like an option to tone down the visual effects a while back, and I'd still like that, but the way Rook moves and the way weapons sound all have this forceful, weighty push that sells the strength of being a warrior. Bioware's been improving on that combat animation since Dragon Age 2, and you can see that experience on the screen. The second is much more difficult to gauge in 10 minutes of someone else's gameplay, and that's how Elden Ring rewards both smart play and stupid play done smartly. Because Elden Ring requires a lot of gameplay knowledge to play well. Whether it's knowing exactly what talismans you need to skyrocket your damage into the stratosphere, the exact resistances and build-up bars on each individual bosses in order to make your status proc build prop off, or the innate muscle memory of being able to dodge every single Crucible Knight attack, the game rewards you for knowing what to do with what's in front of you, while also giving you the breathing room necessary if you want the answer to that dilemma to be run in naked and bash it with a club. And you can do that, the game is built for that as a possibility, even if it requires significantly more muscle memory knowledge than build knowledge. In other words, if they want to do dodge rolls, they better make the enemy combo such that dodge rolling them feels like you've done something cool. If someone wants to make the ultimate tank, they should feel unkillable. Parries and guard counter should give the same and fuck you in particular energy. Launching a combo or finding gear synergy that hits just right should feel like you've pulled off a clever strat, and not just like you did the thing the game told you to do. In contrast, if someone decides they want to try a really suboptimal build, the game should be balanced such that they can develop the skill and muscle memory necessary to get through the game with that build and feel accomplished that way. I'm not saying every build should be easy mode, the exact opposite in fact. Those suboptimal challenge runs wouldn't be challenging if they weren't deliberately pursued as such. But pulling off some dope shit should feel like you've pulled off some dope shit. Of course, in order for a game to reward you for being smart, it ought to punish you for being a dumbass, at least on the higher difficulties. Elden Ring's mostly a good example of this, though there are definitely some bosses that take it too far. I don't have promised concert B-roll, so just copy and paste some over the video in your mind. The enemy AI teaches you how it works by fire. If the Godskin Apostle does this attack, he knows he can hit you, so don't assume you're out of range. He is an input reading bastard, so you better time your heals when he's in the middle of doing something else, or he will pull this shit. Look, I promise I'm good at this game. This was just an absolute moment. On the flip side, you can learn his shit. Figure out which moves leave him open to attack, use spells with tracking to get around his dodges, and even force him into a dodge cycle, and keep him from blundering you as often. Burn his attack patterns into your mind until you can do this shit on muscle memory alone. Again, the game rewards you for knowing how it works, and will let you take on a beefed up modded boss 50 levels too early if you really want to. You just have to be damn good at it. And the fun part of building the boss intelligence to begin with is that it makes difficulty tuning way easier. I used the Elden Ring Reforged mod while playing this run. Go play it if you're looking to freshen up your Elden Ring, it has DLC support now. And I was running on Adept difficulty, which makes some occasional changes to enemy attacks and AI. I don't think this shit is in vanilla, but just generally boosts enemy health and damage dealt. It's not the mod's hard mode enemy aggression. And yet, even with minimal changes to his moveset, being stuck in that room with the boss for that much longer and having to worry about being punished that much harder did make the game more challenging in a way that was simple yet very tangible. I was also deeply underleveled for this fight and was basically doing it because fighting this guy underleveled right off Radon Seals is a rite of passage for me at this point, but details. The same could likely be said for easier game modes. That AI trying to punish your heals doesn't matter if their attacks bounce right off of you when you're dealing a fucktillion amount of damage to them. That way, people who want a story mode don't have to think about it, while utterly insane masochistic freaks like me get to crank things up to 11 and get their shit kicked in.
Don't you still play Origins on casual?
Yeah, because I got used to the console version's normal mode, and for some reason the PC and console versions have different friendly fire settings. Basically, at the end of all this rambling, the best way to make this kind of combat feel really good is to make the players feel like it was their actions and choices that allowed them to accomplish something through their understanding of the gameplay, be it through intelligent building, memorization of how enemies work, or just saying fuck this and turning down the difficulty meter. In conclusion, I am exactly where I was at the start, clawing at the walls of my own mind, desperately waiting for Halloween. But this time, the combat system has moved from the medium hype segment of my brain into the give segment of my brain, so clawing even harder. I'm really looking forward to Veilguard in ways I was not expecting to when that first gameplay reveal dropped. I just hope it can stick the landing it wants to stick. Also, Bioware Warrior wasn't the least favorite because it wasn't flashy, it was the least favorite because Origins had 5 warrior companions and you're always guaranteed to have at least one of them on hand because they're required for the plot. You don't have to reinvent the wheel here. Also, you're the ones who ranked Veilguard Warrior your least favorite with Champion at the very bottom, and that was the flashy fancy build we saw in the video. Finding Thornboard tanking boring is a you problem.
Hex, did you make all these Elden Ring comparisons just to show off your mad gamer skills?
Nope, made it to show off my drip. Get Elden blinged, motherfucker. Every day I wake up, and every day I'm like, I'm gonna make a video that's so easy to edit. And then I make the video, and it is not easy to edit. And that's why this is like 2 weeks after I announced it and way too late and everything. There's so much more information that I did not get to. Will I get to it later? Who knows? I think the official pivot to a Dragon Age channel is nearing completion. I say as I have like 3 Fallout scripts in the works. Don't worry about it, it's fine. But, yeah. I definitely think we'll be doing a Let's Play of this video once it drops in like 2 months. In the meantime, if you think I have anything worthwhile creatively to offer, drop a like and a subscribe, and we'll see where this goes in the future. Alrighty, bye! I I've been trying to do this line for like 10 seconds, but I accidentally gave myself the hiccups while drinking, and I keep hiccuping halfway through the line. Like that. Someone please help. The enemy AI teaches you how it works by fire. If the good... I've been trying to do this line for the past 3 minutes, but my hiccups won't stop. I have so little time left to finish recording, please. Please.